In the scorching heat of the Texas desert, a lone cowboy made a choice that would change the course of history forever. When Jack Morrison found two terrified little girls abandoned in the wilderness, crying beside their overturned wagon, he had no idea they were far more than they seemed. With nothing but his horse, his gun, and his conscience, he saved them from certain death. He raised them as his own, teaching them to rope cattle, shoot straight, and live with honor. But the girls carried a secret one that would remain hidden for 15 years. On a quiet evening in 2035, when the sky suddenly split open with blinding light, Jack finally understood the truth. A magnificent starship descended upon his ranch, and from it emerged beings who called him by name. The orphans he'd saved were royalty from another world, and now they had returned to repay an impossible debt. This is the story of a simple man who became a legend across two worlds. Jack Morrison was never supposed to be a hero. He was just a weathered ranch hand with calloused palms and a quiet demeanor, working a patch of unforgiving land in West Texas that most people had forgotten existed. At 40 years old, he'd spent half his life under the relentless sun, herding cattle and fixing fences, speaking more to his horse than to other human beings. The ranch was 60 miles from the nearest town, a speck of civilization in an ocean of dust and sagebrush. Jack preferred it that way. People complicated things. They lied, they hurt each other, they left. The desert was honest in its cruelty. It was a September morning in 2020 when everything changed. Jack had ridden out before dawn to check the northern fence line, where coyotes had been testing the wire. The air was still cool, carrying that peculiar silence that comes before the heat makes everything shimmer and distort. His horse, an aging roan named Copper, picked her way carefully through the rocky terrain. That's when Jack heard it, a sound so out of place it made his skin prickle. Children crying. He found them about 200 yards off his property, huddled beside the wreckage of what looked like an old covered wagon, though that made no sense. Nobody used wagons like that anymore, except for historical reenactments. The vehicle was blackened and twisted, as if it had caught fire and burned out. And there, clinging to each other in the meager shade it provided, were two little girls. They couldn't have been more than 3 and 5 years old. Their clothes were strange, not quite right for the time, or place made of fabric that seemed to shimmer even in the harsh morning light. Their skin was pale, untouched by the sun that should have burned them badly by now. And their eyes, when they looked up at him, were the most unusual shade of violet he'd ever seen. Jack dismounted slowly, approaching the way he would a spooked colt. "Hey there, little ones," he said softly. "You hurt?" The older girl pulled her sister closer, watching him with those impossible eyes. She didn't speak, but she didn't run either. Jack noticed there were no adults anywhere nearby, no bodies, no tracks leading away from the wreckage. It was as if these children had simply appeared here. He checked the wagon carefully. Whatever had burned it had been intensely hot. The metal was melted in places, and there was a smell he couldn't identify, something chemical and alien. The situation was impossible. There was no road for miles, no settlements, nothing. Yet here were two children, alive against all odds, with no explanation for how they'd gotten here. Jack made a decision in that moment that would define the rest of his life. He couldn't leave them. Even if he rode for help, they'd be dead from exposure before he got back. He gathered them up, one in each arm, and settled them on Copper's back. The younger one whimpered, but the older girl met his eyes with a gravity no 5-year-old should possess. "Safe now," she whispered in barely accented English. "You saved us." Back at the ranch, Jack faced a dilemma. The logical thing would be to call the authorities, report found children, let the system handle it. But something stopped him. The girls were terrified at the mention of other people, of hospitals, of police. The older one, who finally told him her name was Arya, begged him with tears streaming down her face not to tell anyone they were there. Her sister, Luna, just clung to him with surprising strength. And there was something else, something Jack couldn't quite articulate, a feeling that these children were running from something, and that turning them over to authorities might be sentencing them to something worse than death in the desert. So Jack Morrison, a man who'd spent his entire adult life alone, suddenly became a father. He cleaned them up, fed them, and put them to bed in his spare room, which hadn't been used in years. That night, as he sat on his porch watching the stars, he wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. He had no idea how to raise children. He barely remembered how to talk to people. But when he checked on them before turning in and saw them sleeping peacefully for what was probably the first time in days, something settled in his chest. They needed him. That was enough. The first few months were chaos. Jack had to learn everything from scratch cooking meals beyond beans and bacon, washing clothes properly, braiding hair, treating scraped knees. He drove into town and bought children's clothes, books, toys, telling the curious store clerk they were his nieces visiting for the summer. He taught himself to be patient when Luna woke screaming from nightmares, to answer Arya's endless questions about this world they now lived in. Because it became clear, very quickly, that these girls were not from around here. Not just from another state or country from somewhere else entirely. They spoke English, but sometimes slipped into a language Jack had never heard, fluid and musical. They knew things no children should know, like the names of stars he couldn't see without a telescope, the mathematical patterns in nature, the way to predict weather by reading air pressure changes. And sometimes, when they thought he wasn't looking, small objects would move on their own near them. A cup sliding across a table, a door closing without being touched. Jack pretended not to notice. Whatever they were, wherever they came from, they were just children. His children now. He never reported them, never registered them for school. The ranch was remote enough that nobody questioned the presence of two little girls in the rare times he went to town. He homeschooled them as best he could, though Arya often corrected his science and mathematics. The years began to pass, and Jack fell into a rhythm he'd never expected to find. The girls learned to ride horses, to rope cattle, to shoot tin cans off fence posts. They helped with the ranch work, growing strong and capable. And slowly, they stopped looking over their shoulders quite so often. They smiled more. They laughed. They called him Dad. By the time Arya turned 12 and Luna 10, they had become true ranch kids, indistinguishable from any others you might find in rural Texas, except for those distinctive violet eyes. Jack had taught them everything he knew about living off the land, and they had absorbed it all with remarkable speed. They could track a lost calf through miles of scrubland, fix a tractor engine, deliver a foal, and cook a decent meal from whatever was in the pantry. To anyone who might have asked, they were Jack Morrison's daughters, and that was the whole truth as far as he was concerned. But the questions never truly went away. Late at night, when Jack sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the girls sleep inside, he wondered about their real parents. Were they out there somewhere, searching desperately for their lost children? Or had they died in whatever catastrophe brought the girls to the desert? Arya and Luna never spoke of their past. They had, it seemed, made a mutual decision to leave it buried. Jack respected that. He knew about the power of choosing to forget. Yet there were moments when the truth of their otherness was impossible to ignore. One summer evening when Arya was 13, Jack found her standing in the pasture at twilight, her arms raised to the sky. She was speaking in that strange language, and as he watched from the barn, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The air around her began to glow softly, and for just a moment, she lifted several inches off the ground. When she noticed him watching, she dropped immediately, the light vanishing. They stared at each other across the distance. Jack said nothing, just nodded slowly and went back to his work. If she could fly, well, that was her business. He'd still love her come morning. Luna's gifts were different but equally inexplicable. She could sense things, storms coming days before they arrived, when an animal was sick before it showed symptoms, when someone was approaching the ranch before they came into view. More than once, her warnings had saved them from disaster. A flash flood that would have trapped them in the wrong canyon. A rattlesnake coiled in the barn. A visitor with ill intentions whom Jack turned away at the gate. The child had an awareness of the world that went beyond normal human perception, and Jack learned to trust it absolutely. The girls also aged differently. Not drastically, but noticeably if you paid close attention. At 13 and 11, they both looked and acted somewhat younger than Earth children of the same years. Their development seemed to follow a slower trajectory. Jack wondered if their people, wherever they came from, lived longer than humans. How long might they live? How long would he have with them? These thoughts kept him awake sometimes, but he pushed them away. All parents eventually had to let their children go. He'd cross that bridge when he came to it. The town remained mostly ignorant of the girl's existence, but occasionally someone would stop by the ranch, a lost traveler, a salesman, a government surveyor. Jack handled these situations carefully, presenting the girls as his adopted daughters, orphaned relatives, keeping the story vague enough to avoid follow-up questions. Most people didn't care enough to dig deeper. Rural Texas had a long tradition of minding your own business. But there was one close call that nearly exposed everything. A social worker appeared one day, responding to an anonymous tip that there were unregistered children living on the Morrison Ranch. The woman was thorough and skeptical, demanding to see paperwork, vaccination records, evidence of education. Jack had none of it. He'd lived off the grid with these girls for nearly 9 years, and suddenly, the house of cards was threatening to collapse. Arya, 14 by then, handled the situation with a composure that stunned him. She spoke to the social worker with perfect calm, explaining they were homeschooled, showing her the books they studied, demonstrating her advanced knowledge of literature, science, and mathematics. Luna charmed the woman with her shy smile and detailed knowledge of biology from raising animals. But it was what happened when the social worker went back to her car that saved them. She sat in the vehicle for a long moment, reviewing her notes, clearly preparing to call for backup or launch an investigation. Jack watched from the porch, his heart sinking, knowing this was the end of their quiet life. Then Arya walked over to the car window. Jack couldn't hear what she said, but he saw a soft glow emanate from her hand, just for a second. The social worker's expression went blank, then confused, then peaceful. She smiled at Arya, started her car, and drove away. They never heard from her again. "What did you do?" Jack asked when Arya came back inside. She looked at him with those ancient eyes. "I helped her remember that she verified everything and that we were fine," she said simply. "She filed a report saying the tip was unfounded." "We're safe, Dad." Jack should have been disturbed by his daughter's ability to manipulate minds, but instead, he just felt relief. Whatever she was, whatever powers she possessed, she used them to protect their family. That was enough. As the girls entered their teenage years, they began asking more questions about the world beyond the ranch. They wanted to know about cities, about other people, about Earth's history and cultures. Jack did his best with books and the spotty internet connection he'd finally installed. They watched documentaries together, studied maps, learned about human civilization. The girls were fascinated by everything, absorbing information with inhuman speed. Sometimes Jack caught them looking at the sky with expressions of longing so profound it broke his heart. They missed their home, wherever that was. But they never spoke of leaving. Life settled into a new normal. The ranch prospered in small ways. The cattle were healthier, the land more productive. Jack attributed it to the girls' help, but he suspected there was more to it than physical labor. Sometimes, he'd find Luna standing in a field, her hands on the earth, humming that strange melody from her native language. The next week, the grass there would be particularly green. Arya had a way with the animals that went beyond good horsemanship. They trusted her instantly, even the wildest mustangs. Magic, Jack supposed, though he'd never use that word aloud. On Arya's 16th birthday, or what they decided to celebrate as her 16th birthday, since they didn't know her actual birth date, Jack gave her the only valuable thing he owned, his mother as ring. It was simple, just a silver band with a small turquoise stone, but it had been in his family for 3 generations. "You're my daughter in every way that matters," he told her as he slipped it onto her finger. She cried, which she rarely did, and hugged him so tight he could barely breathe. "You saved us," she whispered, just as she had all those years ago in the desert. "You gave us a life." Luna watched from the doorway, smiling, her eyes suspiciously bright. That night, the 3 of them sat on the porch, as they often did, watching the stars wheel overhead in the clear desert sky. Jack pointed out constellations, the same ones his father had shown him decades ago. The girls listened politely, but he knew they could see so much more than he ever would. They could probably name every star, tell him which ones had planets, which ones harbored life. But they kept that knowledge to themselves, content to share this simple moment with their father. For Jack Morrison, who had spent so much of his life alone, these were the richest years he'd ever known. He had no idea how soon it would all change. The 15th anniversary of finding the girls arrived with no particular fanfare. Jack had never marked the exact date. September was hot, and every day looked the same. But it was sometime in that month, in the year 2035, when Jack Morrison was 55 years old, and the girls were approximately 18 and 16. They had grown into remarkable young women. Arya was tall and confident, with her mother's bearing, whoever her mother had been. Luna was quieter, more introspective, but with a core of steel that surprised anyone who underestimated her. They ran the ranch as much as Jack did now, and he'd begun to think about the future, about leaving the property to them, about what they'd do when he was gone. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Jack had just finished repairing the windmill that pumped water to the cattle troughs. His back ached, reminding him he wasn't as young as he used to be. The girls were in the house preparing dinner, and the sun was settling toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. He was washing his hands at the outdoor pump when Luna appeared in the doorway, her face drained of color. "Dad," she said, her voice strange and distant. "They're coming." Before Jack could ask who, Arya appeared behind her sister, and for the first time since he'd known them, he saw fear in her eyes. "Real, bone-deep terror. We need to hide," Arya said. "We need to—" She never finished the sentence. The sky split open with light. It wasn't like a sunrise or a spotlight. This was something else entirely, a tearing of the fabric of reality itself. The air filled with a sound that Jack felt in his chest rather than heard with his ears, a deep thrumming vibration that made his teeth ache. Copper and the other horses screamed in the barn. The cattle stampeded away from the light, and Jack stood frozen, watching as something massive descended from the sky. The Starship was unlike anything he'd seen in movies or imagined in his wildest dreams. It was enormous, easily the size of a football field, but it moved with impossible grace and silence once that initial sound faded. The hull was made of something that seemed to shift between metal and liquid, reflecting the sunset in colors that shouldn't exist. Geometric patterns covered its surface, glowing with soft blue and silver light. It hovered about 50 feet above the ranch, and the displacement of air it created kicked up a dust storm that forced Jack to shield his eyes. The girls stood on the porch, holding hands, their faces upturned to the ship. They weren't running. They weren't hiding. They stood with a dignity and composure that suddenly made them seem like strangers. Jack moved toward them, his hand instinctively going to the rifle he kept by the door, though he knew it would be useless against something like this. "Girls," he called over the rushing wind, "get inside." But Arya turned to him, and the look on her face stopped him cold. It was resignation mixed with sorrow, the expression of someone who'd always known this day would come. "It's okay, Dad," she said, though tears were streaming down her face. "They're here for us. We have to go." Luna was crying too, clutching her sister's hand. "We don't want to leave you," she choked out. "We never wanted to leave." An opening appeared in the bottom of the ship, and a beam of light descended like a staircase made of illumination. 3 figures began walking down that impossible stairway, and Jack's breath caught. They were humanoid, but clearly not human. Tall, perhaps 7 feet, with skin that seemed to shimmer between pale blue and silver. They wore clothing that looked like liquid metal, constantly flowing over their bodies. Their eyes were large and multifaceted, like jewels. And on their heads, they wore crowns, or at least structures that served the same purpose, made of that same flowing metallic material. The central figure, slightly taller than the others, reached the ground and approached the porch. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating in Jack's bones. But the words were clear. "Princess Ariavel of the House of Eternal Skies. Princess Lunaven of the House of Eternal Skies. Your period of sanctuary has ended. The throne calls you home." Jack's world tilted. Princesses. His daughters, because they were his daughters, regardless of blood, were princesses. From the House of Eternal Skies. From somewhere in that vast darkness above. He looked at Arya and Luna, seeing them as if for the first time. Of course they were royalty. It explained everything, the grace, the power, the knowledge beyond their years. They were never supposed to be here. Arya stepped forward, her spine straight, her head high. When she spoke, it was in that musical language Jack had heard them use in private. The being responded in kind. They conversed for several minutes, while Jack stood helplessly by, understanding nothing. Luna gripped the porch railing, her knuckles white, tears flowing freely. Finally, Arya turned back to Jack, and the princess was gone. She was just his scared daughter again. 15 years ago, our planet was invaded, she said, her voice shaking. Our parents, the king and queen, sent us away in an escape pod. They set the coordinates for the nearest inhabited planet, Earth. The pod crashed in your desert. They thought we died in the invasion. But we didn't. We found you instead. She took a shuddering breath. The war is over now. Our people won, but it took 15 years. They've been searching for us across 100 worlds. And now they've found us. The being the royal guard, Jack realized spoke again. Arya translated, "We must return immediately. The coronation has been delayed for our return. Our people need us." Luna finally spoke, her voice small. "We don't want to go, Dad. This is our home. You're our family." Jack felt something break inside his chest. He'd always known on some level that this day might come, that they might be found, that he'd have to let them go. But knowing didn't make it any easier. He walked down the steps to stand before the royal guard, acutely aware that he was just a weathered cowboy facing beings who traveled between stars. "These girls," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've raised them for 15 years. I've kept them safe. I've loved them. They're mine." The guard regarded him with those jeweled eyes. When it spoke again, Arya didn't need to translate. Jack understood the tone. They were taking the girls. He had no choice in the matter. But Arya stepped between them. "No," she said firmly in English, then repeated it in her own language. "This man saved our lives when we were helpless. He raised us with kindness and honor. He deserves our respect and gratitude. We will return to our people because duty demands it. But we will never forget what he gave us." She turned to the guard and spoke rapidly in that flowing language, her tone brooking no argument despite her tear-stained face. Jack caught his own name several times. Jack Morrison. The being was silent for a long moment, then did something unexpected. It bowed, a small incline of the head, but unmistakable. When it spoke again, Arya translated with wonder in her voice. He says you are recognized as the keeper of the princesses. You have earned the gratitude of the House of Eternal Skies, and they wish to know ... Will you come with us? The question hung in the air like smoke. Will you come with us? Jack stared at Arya, convinced he'd misheard. Come with you? He repeated. To your planet? The royal guard spoke again, and Arya translated, her voice gaining strength. Our people have a tradition. Those who save royal blood are honored for life. You are the keeper, the guardian who preserved the heirs to the throne. You would be given land, title, a place in our court. You would never want for anything. And ... double quotes her voice. We wouldn't have to say goodbye. Luna rushed forward and grabbed Jack's arm. Please, Dad, please come with us. We can't leave you here alone. Jack looked around at the ranch, the weathered house, the barn that needed a new roof, the endless desert stretching to the horizon. This land had been his whole life. His father had worked this ranch, and his grandfather before that. It was in his blood, as much a part of him as his own bones. Could he really leave it all behind? But then he looked at the girls, at Arya with her fierce intelligence and Luna with her gentle wisdom, and he knew the truth. The ranch was just land. These girls were his family, the only family he had left. He'd already lost everyone else in his life. His parents, dead years ago. A brother he hadn't spoken to in decades. A wife who'd left him before any children came. He'd been alone until that September morning 15 years ago when he found 2 terrified children in the desert. How long would I be gone? He asked. The guard consulted with the others, then spoke. Arya translated. There's no equivalent in your time. Our year is different from yours. The journey alone will take several of your months, and then the coronation, the transition of power, establishing us in our roles. It could be a year, maybe more. But, she added quickly, we could bring you back, anytime you wanted. They have the technology. Jack thought about the cattle, the horses. Old Copper who'd been with him through everything. He thought about his rifle over the mantel, his father's watch in the drawer, the photographs of his parents on the wall. Could he really just walk away from all of this? But looking into his daughter's hopeful, desperate faces, he realized he'd already made the decision. He'd made it 15 years ago when he lifted them onto Copper as back and brought them home. I need an hour, he said, to take care of some things. Then I'll come. The relief on the girls' faces was like sunrise. Luna threw her arms around him, and Arya joined them, and for a moment, they just stood there in a 3-way embrace while the royal guard waited patiently and the massive starship hummed overhead. Finally, Jack pulled back. Help me, he said. We've got work to do. The next hour was a controlled chaos of preparation. Jack called his nearest neighbor, a rancher named Tom Hayes who lived 30 miles east. Tom had helped him occasionally over the years and had met the girls a few times. Jack told him he had a family emergency, needed to leave for a while. Would Tom mind looking after the ranch? He'd pay him well. Tom, confused but agreeable, said he'd be over in the morning. Jack left him a note with instructions and his bank account information. Everything he owned, Tom could use to maintain the property. If Jack didn't come back, well, Tom could have it. He fed the animals one last time, giving Copper an extra measure of oats and a long scratch behind the ears. You be good for Tom, he whispered to the old horse. Copper whickered softly, as if she understood. Jack packed a small bag, some clothes, his father's watch, a photograph of his parents, and one of the girls taken on Luna's 15th birthday. He took his rifle off the mantel, then put it back. Where he was going, it wouldn't be useful. Arya and Luna moved through the house like ghosts, touching things, memorizing. This had been their home, the only real home they'd ever known. Luna picked up a stone from the porch that she'd painted years ago with a clumsy flower. Arya took the book of poetry Jack had read to them when they were small. small totems of the life they'd built together. The royal guard waited patiently, not rushing them. Perhaps they understood the magnitude of what was happening. As Jack locked the door for the last time, he felt the weight of it. He was 55 years old, and he was about to travel to another planet. The absurdity almost made him laugh. If someone had told him this morning that he'd be leaving Earth by evening, he'd have thought they were drunk or crazy. But life had been teaching him for 15 years that the universe was stranger and more wonderful than he'd ever imagined. The walk to the Starship felt eternal and instantaneous at once. The Royal Guard led them up that stairway of light, and Jack felt a tingling sensation as he stepped onto it, like walking through a waterfall made of electricity. The interior of the ship was beyond his comprehension. Walls that seemed to be made of contained starlight, floors that felt solid but looked transparent, showing the ground far below. Strange symbols floated in the air, rearranging themselves constantly. The technology was so advanced it might as well have been magic. They were led to a chamber that the guard identified as the royal quarters. It was surprisingly simple beds that conformed to their bodies, walls that could display any image or become transparent to show the outside, facilities that Jack understood the purpose of, even if he didn't understand how they worked. Arya and Luna sat on one of the beds, looking small and overwhelmed despite their royal status. Jack sat beside them, putting an arm around each. "You scared?" Luna asked him. Jack considered lying, then decided against it. "Terrified," he admitted. "I've never been more than 200 miles from the ranch. Now I'm going to another planet." "Yeah, I'm scared." Arya leaned her head on his shoulder. "We're scared too," she confessed. "We barely remember our home. We don't know our people. We've been Earth girls for 15 years. What if we don't fit there anymore?" "You'll fit," Jack said with more confidence than he felt. "You're smart, brave, and kind. You'll figure it out. And I'll be right there with you." The guard appeared in the doorway and spoke. Arya translated. "We're about to depart. We should prepare." Jack nodded and moved to what he hoped was a secure position. There was a deep thrumming sound, and then a sensation of movement that wasn't quite movement. The wall beside him became transparent, and he watched the ranch, his home, his whole life, shrink below them. They rose into the evening sky, faster and faster, until the ranch was just a speck, then invisible. Jack saw the curvature of the earth, the stars growing brighter without atmosphere to dim them. He saw his entire planet become a blue marble, then a point of light, then lost among millions of other lights. He was leaving everything he knew. The terror of it was matched only by the wonder. Luna took his hand. "Thank you for coming with us," she whispered. "Thank you for saving us. Thank you for everything." Jack squeezed her hand, then reached for Arya's too. "You saved me too," he said quietly. "I was just a lonely old man before you came into my life. You gave me purpose. You gave me family. I'd follow you anywhere." And as the ship oriented itself toward a destination he couldn't imagine, traveling faster than light through the vast darkness between stars, Jack Morrison made peace with his choice. The ranch would survive or it wouldn't. Earth would keep spinning. But these girls, these young women, these princesses needed him still. And he would not fail them. The journey, they told him, would take 3 months by Earth reckoning. 3 months of traveling through hyperspace or whatever they called it. Jack settled in for the longest ride of his life, hoping that at the end of it, he'd be half as brave as he needed to be. Because he was about to meet an alien civilization, bow before alien royalty, and somehow navigate a world he couldn't begin to understand. All he had was his integrity, his love for his daughters, and a stubborn refusal to give up. It would have to be enough. Time moved strangely on the ship. There were no days or nights in any meaningful sense, just cycles of light and dark that the crew maintained for the benefit of species that evolved under stars. Jack tried to keep to his old ranch schedule, wake early, stay busy, sleep when tired. But without physical labor to exhaust him, sleep came fitfully. He spent hours watching the view screens, seeing space in ways no human had ever witnessed. Nebulas that looked like cosmic paintings, star systems being born, worlds that might harbor life spinning silently in the void. The ship's crew kept their distance, observing him with curiosity, but rarely interacting. Jack was the alien here, the strange creature who'd somehow earned the protection of their lost princesses. But Arya and Luna spent as much time with him as their obligations allowed, because they had obligations now. Tutors came daily to re-educate them in their language, their history, their responsibilities. They sat through hours of instruction about planetary governance, diplomatic protocols, religious ceremonies. They were being transformed back into royalty. Jack watched the change with mixed feelings. Arya grew more regal, more distant, remembering or perhaps rediscovering the princess she'd been born to be. Luna struggled more, clinging to her Earth identity even as she tried to absorb her heritage. Some nights she'd de-slip into Jack's quarters and curl up like she had when she was small, crying quietly. "I don't know how to be a princess, Dad," she'd whisper. "I only know how to be a cowgirl." Jack would hold her and tell her that being a good person was the same anywhere in the universe, on any throne. He hoped that was true. About halfway through the journey, they entered a region the crew called the Gateway, a massive structure floating in the void that somehow connected distant parts of the galaxy. Jack watched in awe as the ship approached what looked like a ring made of crystallized starlight, miles in diameter. When they passed through it, space itself seemed to twist and fold. He felt nauseated for a moment, and then they were somewhere else entirely. Weeks of travel bypassed in an instant. The technology was incomprehensible. On the other side of the gateway, they began encountering other ships. At first just a few, then dozens, then hundreds. The girls explained that they were entering the heart of their civilization's territory, dozens of inhabited systems, connected by gates, thousands of worlds united under the eternal throne. Jack saw ships of every imaginable configuration, some biological, grown rather than built, others purely energy, contained in force fields. The diversity of life in the universe was staggering. And then, finally, they saw it. The homeworld. The crew called it Arethea, though in their language it was a sound like wind through crystal chimes. Jack pressed his face to the view screen like a child. The planet was larger than Earth, with 3 moons and rings like Saturn's, but made of ice crystals that reflected light in rainbow patterns. The continents were purple and blue, the ocean silver. Cities glowed on the night side like constellations brought to ground. It was impossibly beautiful and utterly alien. As they descended through the atmosphere, Jack got his first real look at the civilization that had created the ship around him. Arethea's cities were works of art, buildings that seemed to grow organically from the landscape, spires that reached miles into the sky connected by bridges of solidified light. Gardens covered every surface, plants in colors Earth had never seen. And everywhere, people tall, graceful beings moving through their lives, so advanced and yet so familiar. They fell in love, raised children, worked, and played. Life was life, regardless of the world. The royal palace was situated on an island in the middle of a silver sea. As their ship approached, Jack could see crowds gathering on the shores. Thousands, tens of thousands of people coming to witness the return of their lost princesses. The ship settled onto a landing platform that jutted out over the water, and Jack's heart began pounding. This was real. This was happening. In moments, he would step out onto an alien world, and everything would change forever. The royal guard who brought them, Jack had learned his name was something like. Zephan entered their quarters one last time. He spoke directly to Jack with Arya translating. "You are about to enter the presence of the eternal throne. The king and queen have survived, though the war cost them greatly. They will want to see their daughters immediately. You will be presented as the keeper, the human who preserved their heirs. Show respect, but do not fear. You have earned honor beyond measure." Jack nodded, his mouth dry. He'd faced down charging bulls, rattlesnakes, and the hardships of desert life without flinching. But the thought of meeting alien royalty terrified him. He smoothed down his worn shirt, the nicest thing he'd packed, and followed as Arya and Luna, now dressed in flowing garments that seemed to be made of liquid moonlight, led the way to the exit. The platform opened, and the sound hit them first, a roar of voices, thousands of people cheering. The crowds on the shore were waving banners that glowed with bioluminescent patterns. The air was thick with something like music, but more complex, layered with harmonics that made Jack's bones vibrate. Arya and Luna stepped out first, and the roar increased. Jack followed, feeling exposed and small, and immediately wanted to step back into the ship. But then he saw them, the king and queen, waiting at the end of the platform. They were taller than the guards, more regal, with skin that seemed to shift between silver and gold. The queen wore a crown of living light that floated above her head, and the king bore a staff that pulsed with energy. But what struck Jack most was their faces, the unmistakable expressions of parents seeing their lost children after 15 years of believing them dead. The queen broke protocol first. She ran across the platform, her regal bearing abandoned in a moment of pure maternal instinct. She fell to her knees before Arya and Luna, pulling them into her arms and making sounds that transcended language. Grief, joy, relief, love, all of it poured out in a wail that silenced the crowds. The king followed more slowly, but with no less emotion, wrapping his arms around all three of them. Jack stood back, feeling like an intruder on this private moment, tears streaming down his own weathered face. Finally, the queen looked up and saw him. She stood, still holding Luna's hand, and fixed those multifaceted eyes on Jack Morrison. She spoke, her voice like bells, and Arya translated through her tears. "You are the one, the human who saved them." Jack nodded, not trusting his voice. The queen approached him, and Jack did the only thing he could think of. He bowed, awkward and uncertain but sincere. The queen reached out and lifted his chin, forcing him to meet her gaze. When she spoke again, Arya's translation was filled with wonder. She says that when they sent the girls away, they prayed to the ancient stars that someone, somewhere would show them kindness. They prayed that their daughters would find not just safety, but love. She says they can see in Arya and Luna's eyes that their prayers were answered beyond imagining. She says you gave them not just survival, but childhood, happiness, family, things that cannot be repaid. The king joined them, placing a hand on Jack's shoulder. He spoke at length, and Arya struggled to translate through her emotions. He says that according to the ancient laws, you are now and forever the keeper of the royal house. You will be given land, title, and wealth. But more than that, you will be given their eternal gratitude and friendship. He says you are the brother they never had, and you will always have a place in their home. Jack finally found his voice. "I don't want payment," he said gruffly. "I did what any decent person would do. I took care of children who needed help. That's all." Arya translated, and something like amusement flickered across the king's face. He responded, and Arya smiled through her tears. "He says that proves you are worthy of every honor they wish to bestow. Only a truly noble soul refuses reward for nobility." The ceremony that followed was overwhelming. Jack was led into the palace, a structure so vast and beautiful it made his eyes hurt, and through halls lined with beings from 100 different worlds. He was presented to the assembled court, his name announced in that musical language, followed by a title Arya translated as Keeper of the Lost Heirs, Friend of the Eternal Throne, Father to Princesses. He stood there in his warm ranch clothes, a sunburned cowboy from Texas, while an alien civilization honored him as a hero. That night, in quarters that were larger than his entire ranch house and filled with luxuries he couldn't identify, Jack sat alone trying to process everything. There was a knock at his door, a chime really, a sound rather than a physical knock, and Arya and Luna entered. They changed from their ceremonial robes into simpler clothes, and they looked more like his daughters again. "How are you holding up, Dad?" Arya asked, sitting beside him. Jack laughed weakly. "I met the king and queen of an alien planet today. I'm holding up about as well as you'd expect." Luna curled up on his other side. "They want to know everything about our time on Earth," she said. "Every detail. They've been looking at our memories. There's technology that can do that here. And they saw the ranch, saw our life. The queen cried when she saw you teaching me to ride copper. The king wants to learn about Earth horses. Your mother and father are good people," Jack said. "I can see where you girls got your kindness," Arya nodded. "They want you to stay as long as you want. Not just for the coronation, but forever, if you choose." "They mean it, Dad. You're family to them now." Jack considered that. Forever on an alien world, in luxury and comfort, honored and respected. It was tempting, but "I appreciate that," he said slowly. "More than I can say, but I can't stay forever. I'm not built for this world. I'm a simple man, and this place is anything but simple. I'll stay for the coronation. Make sure you girls are settled, meet your people. But then, I need to go home. To Earth, to the ranch." He saw the disappointment in their faces and rushed to continue. "But that doesn't mean goodbye. You said they can bring me back any time, right? So I'll visit. And you can visit me. The ranch will always be your home too, whenever you need it." Luna hugged him tight. "We'll visit all the time," she promised. "We'll bring Mom and Dad. They can meet Copper and see where we grew up. It'll be perfect." Arya joined the embrace. "You're not losing us, Dad. You never could. We're just expanding the family." Jack held his daughters both sets now, he supposed, and felt a peace settle over him. The universe was vast and strange, but love was universal. That was enough to build a life on, whether on Earth or Arithia or anywhere in between. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Jack attended state dinners where he couldn't identify a single food, but ate politely anyway. He watched ceremonies in languages he didn't understand but felt the power of. He met beings from 100 worlds and tried not to stare at their differences. He learned that the war that had separated the royal family had been brutal, an invasion by a coalition that wanted to exploit Arithia's resources. It had taken 15 years of fighting, but the eternal throne had prevailed. Thousands had died. The king bore scars both visible and invisible. The queen had led fleets into battle herself. They had won, but the cost had been terrible. And through it all, he watched Arya and Luna transform. They learned to move with royal grace, to speak with authority, to make decisions that affected billions. But they never lost the core of who they'd become on Earth. Arya still had dirt under her fingernails from the palace gardens. Luna still sang Earth songs when she thought no one was listening. They were princesses, yes, but they were also cowgirls. Both truths could exist together. The coronation took place on the winter solstice of Arithia, a day when all 3 moons aligned and the planet's rings glowed their brightest. Representatives from every world in the Eternal Throne's domain gathered in the palace as Grand Hall, a space so vast it had its own weather system, with clouds drifting near the ceiling and gentle rain falling in designated areas that fed the gardens growing along the walls. Jack stood in the place of honor, wearing formal robes that had been made for him, feeling like an imposter but standing tall nonetheless. Arya entered first, walking alone down a pathway that glowed beneath her feet. She wore a gown that seemed to be made of starlight itself, and her violet eyes shone with determination and grace. The crown that descended onto her head from above, lowered by some technology Jack couldn't fathom, was alive with energy, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She was proclaimed Crown Princess, first heir to the Eternal Throne, and the hall erupted in that harmonic cheering that still made Jack's bones vibrate. Luna followed, smaller and more hesitant but no less regal. Her gown was silver like moonlight, and her crown was gentler, set with stones that glowed softly. She was proclaimed second princess, keeper of the sacred gardens, guardian of the living worlds. It was a title that suited her perfectly. Luna had always had a way with growing things. When she took her place beside her sister, she searched the crowd until she found Jack's face, and she smiled. That same shy, sweet smile he'd seen for 15 years. She was still his little girl, just wearing a crown now. The king and queen formally presented their daughters to the assembled dignitaries, speaking of their miraculous survival and return. They spoke of the keeper who had preserved them, and Jack was called forward. He walked that glowing path on legs that threatened to give out, and knelt before the eternal throne as he'd been instructed. The king placed a medallion around his neck, a heavy thing made of metal that seemed to be liquid and solid at once. "Jack Morrison of Earth," the king said, in heavily accented but clear English he'd been learning. "You are named Keeper of the Royal House, Guardian of Heirs, and Friend to the Throne. From this day until the stars grow cold, you and your line will have the protection and gratitude of our people. We name you Lord of the Silver Sands, giving you domain over a territory on your homeworld, that you may live in comfort and honor. We offer you a seat on our council, that your wisdom may guide us. We offer you all that we have, and know it will never be enough to repay what you have given us." Jack looked up at this alien king, this father who had lost his children and gotten them back, and saw only gratitude and respect. "Your Majesty," Jack said, his voice rough but steady, "I don't want land or titles. I don't want seats on councils. I just want to know that those girls, those young women, are happy and safe. That's all the payment I need." The king smiled, a very human expression on an alien face. "Then you shall have that and all the rest besides, because that is what it means to be honored by the eternal throne." The celebration that followed lasted 3 days. Jack endured it as best he could, though he slipped away whenever possible to find quiet corners where he could breathe. On the second day, Arya found him in one of the palace gardens, sitting by a fountain that defied gravity, water flowing upward in spirals. "Dad," she said, settling beside him, "you're miserable here." It wasn't a question. Jack sighed. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Prouder than I can say. But yes, I'm miserable. This world is beautiful, but it's not mine. I miss Earth. I miss the desert. I miss my horse and my porch and coffee in the morning while the sun comes up. I miss home." Arya took his hand. "Then go home," she said gently. "We're settled here now. We have our parents, our duties, our people. We'll miss you terribly, but we understand. This isn't your world." Jack felt relief wash over him, followed immediately by guilt. "I don't want you to think I'm abandoning you," he said. Arya laughed. "Dad, you raised us for 15 years. You left your entire planet to come here with us. You stood before the eternal throne in your ranch clothes and refused their gifts because all you cared about was our happiness. You could never abandon us. But you've earned the right to go home." They told the king and queen that evening. The queen looked sad but understanding. "We hoped you might stay," she said through Arya's translation. "But we understand the pull of home. We will send you back with honor, with gifts, with technology that will let you contact the girls whenever you wish, and we will visit. We want to see this ranch that made our daughters who they are." The preparations took a week. Jack was given a small communication device that could reach across light years, a medical treatment that would keep him healthy for decades beyond normal human lifespan so he could see his daughters' lives unfold and enough wealth that he'd never worry about money again, though he protested that too. They loaded a small ship with gifts, seeds from Arethia's gardens, metal that could repair itself, a few technologies that would seem like magic on Earth, but wouldn't be so advanced as to be dangerous. The day of departure was harder than finding the girls had been. Luna cried openly, clinging to Jack like she had when she was small. "Promise you'll call every week," she made him swear. "Promise you'll visit. Promise you won't forget us." Jack held her tight. "I could never forget you, little one. You're written on my heart." "But yes, I promise all of it." Arya was trying to be strong, to be the crown princess, but her facade cracked when it came time to actually say goodbye. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you for everything, for saving us, for raising us, for loving us. Thank you for being the father we needed when we'd lost everything." Jack kissed her forehead. "Thank you for letting me," he replied. "You saved me too, remember? I was just a lonely old man. You made me a father. That's the greatest gift I ever got." The king and queen embraced him as well. This alien couple, who'd become something like family. "Return safely," the king said. "Know that you are always welcome here. And know that we will guard your daughters as fiercely as you guarded ours." Jack nodded, not trusting his voice. He boarded the small ship they'd prepared for him, settling into a seat that adjusted to fit his human frame. The pilot was Zephan, the guard who'd first come to Earth. He nodded to Jack with what might have been respect. As the ship lifted off, Jack watched through the view screen as Arya and Luna stood on the platform, waving. The king and queen stood behind them, hands on their daughters' shoulders. They grew smaller as the ship rose, then disappeared from view as they broke through the atmosphere. Jack pressed his hand against the screen, a futile gesture, but all he had. The journey home was faster. They had a ship optimized for speed, and Zephan knew the fastest routes through the gateways. Still, it took weeks, and Jack spent them in a strange liminal space between worlds, between lives. He watched Earth approach through the view screen, that blue marble growing larger, and felt his heart swell. Home. He was going home. They landed in the desert near the ranch in the middle of the night, the ship's stealth technology hiding them from satellites and curious eyes. Jack stepped out onto Texas soil and almost wept. The air smelled right. The stars looked right, even though he now knew how few of them he could actually see. Zephan helped him unload the gifts, then clasped his shoulder in a gesture that transcended species. "You are a good father," the guard said in halting English. "They are lucky to have you. We are lucky you existed." Then he was gone, the ship rising silently into the night and disappearing. Jack walked the half-mile to his ranch in the darkness, carrying what he could and planning to retrieve the rest in the morning. The house was just as he'd left it. Tom Hayes had kept his word, maintaining everything. The cattle were in the pastures. Copper was in the barn, older but still healthy. The horse whickered when she saw him, and Jack buried his face in her mane, breathing in the familiar smell. Inside, everything was the same but felt different. Jack made coffee, sat on his porch, and watched the sunrise paint the desert golden red. He was home. He was changed. He had traveled farther than any human in history, met aliens, been honored by royalty, watched his daughters become princesses. But he was still Jack Morrison, still a cowboy, still a man who found purpose in simple things. His communication device chimed a video call. He fumbled with it until Arya's face appeared, smiling. "Dad, you made it home safe." Behind her, he could see Luna and even the Queen, all crowded around to see him. "I made it," Jack confirmed. "I'm home." They talked for an hour, bridging the impossible distance between worlds with technology he didn't understand but was grateful for anyway. As the weeks passed, Jack fell back into his routine. Ranching, riding, working the land. But now he had weekly calls with his daughters, hearing about their lives as royalty. They told him about diplomatic missions to other worlds, about learning to govern, about the challenges of being young leaders. He told them about the cattle, about fixing the windmill, about Copper's arthritis. Ordinary things that mattered because they shared them. 3 months after his return, the sky split open again one evening. Jack walked out onto his porch and smiled. The royal ship landed gently in his pasture, and down the ramp came Arya and Luna, dressed in jeans and flannel shirts they must have had made, looking like the ranch girls they'd been. Behind them came the king and queen, looking uncertain and out of place but game to try. "Welcome to Earth," Jack said. "Let me show you where your daughters grew up." He taught the king and queen to ride horses, though they kept using some kind of unconscious telekinesis to keep from falling off. He showed them the desert, explained Earth ecology, cooked them steak over an open fire. The queen wept when she saw Luna's painted rock still on the porch. The king asked 1,000 questions about cattle ranching. And Arya and Luna ran through the land they'd loved, showing their parents everything, bridging their two worlds. As they sat around the fire that night, stars wheeling overhead in patterns that meant different things to different species, Jack Morrison felt complete. He'd lived an impossible life. He'd raised princesses. He'd traveled to another world. He'd been honored by an alien civilization. But more than any of that, he'd loved and been loved. He'd found family when he thought he'd be alone forever. "You know," the queen said through Arya's translation, "our legends speak of mortals who are lifted up by their deeds to become something more. Heroes who earn immortality through their actions. You are such a one, Jack Morrison. Your name will be remembered on our world for as long as our civilization endures. The Keeper. The father who saved the heirs." Jack smiled, watching the fire dance. "I don't need immortality," he said. "I just need this. My daughter's happy. My family together, even if we're scattered across light years. My land under my feet. That's enough." Luna leaned against his shoulder. "It's more than enough," she agreed. "It's everything." And there, under stars that looked down on a cowboy who'd saved 2 alien princesses, on royalty sitting by a campfire in the Texas desert, on a family built from impossible circumstances and held together by love, Jack Morrison knew she was right. He'd done what he was meant to do. He'd saved 2 little girls. And in doing so, he'd saved himself. The universe was vast and strange and full of wonders, but some truths held anywhere. Family was family, love was love, and a good man doing the right thing could change the course of worlds. That was legacy enough for any cowboy.